What was the genetic makeup of the Germanic tribes of Europe, and how has this influenced our map today? Also, what did these ancient peoples look like, how tall were they, and how common were features such as blonde hair amongst them? Now, these Germanic tribes were a collection of ancient groups that initially inhabited northern Europe, yet many of them went on to have a major impact on various other parts of the continent, from the Iberian peninsula to eastern Europe. These peoples included the Goths, the Franks, the Lombards, the Angles and the Saxons, amongst many others. These tribes shared linguistic and cultural similarities and played a crucial role in the history of Europe, particularly during the migration period when they moved across the continent, contributing to the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the shaping of medieval Europe. Empires and kingdoms later arose out of many of these peoples, including the Carolingian Empire from 800 to 887 AD and the Holy Roman Empire from 800 to 1800 AD. Today, the influence of these Germanic peoples extends far beyond the modern boundaries of Germany itself, including having a major impact on England, of course, or the land of the Angles. And on that note, English is a Germanic language, along with the languages of Scandinavia and other languages of Northern Europe, such as the Frisian tongues. Countries such as Switzerland and Austria speak German as well, of course, alongside other languages. So what do we know about Germanic DNA then, and what these ancient peoples would have looked like? Well, let's start with a really interesting example, the Lombards. A Germanic people who conquered most of the Italian peninsula between 568 and 774 AD. The origins of the Lombards seem to have been in the land we call northern Germany today, and they were potentially connected to the Suebi. Now, some sources describe the Suebi as a group of tribes that lived in a region around modern Germany and the Czech Republic, and the Lombards may have been one of those peoples, although this is debated. One thing we do know about the Suebi is that a male hairstyle called the Suebian knot was very common amongst them. Many of the amazing Roman bronze figures show their hair in this Suebian knot, and there is an even more impressive finding that depicts it, called the Osterby man. He was discovered in a bog near Osterby in Germany and is estimated to have lived between 75 and 130 AD, just under 2,000 years ago. What is amazing is that his hair still sits in this perfect Suebian knot. You can see that his hair has a clear reddish tone as well, but it is believed that the acids in the bog coloured his hair this reddish-brown colour. He initially seemed to have dark blonde hair, perhaps with a little red tone as well, and he also had some white hairs, which is quite interesting. So the Osterby man is fascinating, but back to the Lombards and the genetics of these people. Well, a 2018 study published in Nature analysed 63 samples from two cemeteries, one in Hungary and the other in northern Italy, which was associated with the Lombards during the 6th century invasion of Italy. They managed to sequence the DNA of around 37 samples and found that R1b at around 55.3% was the most common Y-DNA haplogroup amongst them, followed by I at 26.4%, both I1a and the more abundant I2a2, with the supplementary information of the study noting that some lineages belonging to I2a2, A1b were particularly common in the Germanic region. They go on to note that R1a is less common but still present, and is associated with the Indo-European diffusion through ancient peoples such as the corded bear culture. G2a CL31 was also found at lower levels, and they note that this haplogroup probably has its origins in the Caucasus and followed the Danubian route of the spread of agriculture in Central Europe and in Italy until the islands of Corsica and Sardinia. They finally added two subhaplogroups, E1b1b and T1a, both at 5.3%, show a Mediterranean distribution with a prevalence in southern Europe, in particular in the Iberian and Italian peninsulas. What is interesting is that the distribution of these Y-DNA haplogroups is similar to present-day Germany, with R1b the most common today, followed by I, then R1a, and then smaller levels of haplogroups such as E1b1b and G, demonstrating that Germanic Y-DNA haplogroups have been pretty stable over at least 1500 years. On the maternal side, a 2019 study that was published in the European Journal of Human Genetics analysed 87 mitochondrial sequences from 9 cemeteries associated with the Lombard migration in modern Czech Republic, Hungary and Italy. They found that H was by far the most common mitochondrial haplogroup among the sample, followed by T2 and then Gi. This again is a similar picture today and in surrounding areas. Now if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing. Next up is the Goths though, a Germanic people that had a major impact in the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the emergence of medieval Europe. They were first reported by Greco-Roman authors in the 3rd century AD, living north of the Danube in what is now Ukraine, Moldova and Romania. They were associated with various ancient cultures, such as the Wilbark culture that flourished in parts of modern Poland, and the Cherniakov culture a little further east. The Goths would later split into different groups, with two main Gothic groups emerging, going on to establish the Ostrogothic kingdom that controlled large parts of Italy for a period, and the Visigothic kingdom that went on to control large parts of the Iberian peninsula and areas of southwest France between around 418 and 720 AD. Two early kings of the Visigoths was Wallia or Valia, the king from 415 to 418 AD, and Theodoric I, who was the king of the Visigoths from 418 to 451. Now a really interesting aspect when looking at the genetics of the Goths is basically, even though we've only been able to look at the genetics of the Goths over the last decade or so, obviously genetic research is quite new, basically what we've found is mirrored the origin stories of the Goths that have been told for over 1,000 years. More specifically, the Goths were always said to have originated in southern Scandinavia before moving south into parts of northern Europe, but now genetic research is basically confirming this origin story. This is because the most common Y-DNA marker amongst the Goths was I1, M253, with I1 a very common haplogroup in Scandinavia, both historically and today, with it actually very common amongst the Vikings, for example, as well. As Gothic peoples moved south from Scandinavia and into northern and eastern Europe initially, before later spreading out further across the continent, they of course picked up some further genetic diversity, yet their origins were likely in Scandinavia, and this is supported by various studies now. As the 2019 study published in Scientific Reports notes, for example, they looked at the genetics of the Goth migration. The collected results seem to be consistent with the historical narrative that assumed that the Goths originated in southern Scandinavia. Then at least part of the Goth population moved south through the territory of contemporary Poland towards the Black Sea region, where they mixed with local populations and formed the Cherniakov culture. But what did Goths look like? Did they look like little emo kids today? Well, not quite. Ancient sources often describe the Goths as being tall and athletic, with light skin, blonde hair and blue eyes. The Greek scholar Procopius noted that the Goths looked similar to the Vandals and the Gepids, which he thought suggested a common origin of all three. In relation to the Goths specifically, he wrote that they all have white bodies and fair hair, and are tall and handsome to look upon. Now the next Germanic people I want to look at is one of the most famous ones, the Franks. Now the Franks emerged as a distinct group of tribes in the 3rd century AD and were initially located along the Rhine River, in areas that are now parts of modern-day Germany, Belgium and the Netherlands. The Franks began to expand into Roman territory during the decline of the Roman Empire, and they expanded their power significantly over subsequent centuries. What do we know about the genetics of the Franks though? Well, the most common Y-DNA haplogroup they belonged to was R1b U106, and this subclad of R1b is particularly associated with Germanic peoples in general. R1b U106 is found at high levels in Germanic parts of Europe today still, such as Frisia and the Netherlands for example, as I note in my video on Dutch DNA. Other haplogroups found amongst the Franks were I1, R1a L664 and I2A2A L801. But what about the genetics of the Anglo-Saxons, who transformed ancient England to a large degree? Well, a really interesting study published in Nature in 2022 that looked at the formation of the early English gene pool detailed this new influx of ancestry and how the haplogroups changed around this time. They analysed 460 medieval northwest Europeans, including 278 individuals from England, mainly from the time period 450 to 850 AD. They found that the haplogroups brought into England by the Anglo-Saxons mirror the DNA we have seen from the other Germanic peoples. As the authors write, the early medieval population of England exhibits a substantial fraction of continental-derived haplotypes belonging to haplogroups R1b U106, R1a M420, I2a1 L460, and I1 M253. Which are commonly found in northern and central Europe and are also common amongst the ancient continental individuals, including the ones we report. In particular, Y chromosomal haplogroups I1 M253 and R1a M420 were absent from our Bronze, Iron and Roman Age British and Irish individuals, but were identified in more than 1/3 of our individuals from early medieval England. So these haplogroups are very common amongst Germanic people in general and were spread across Europe through various migrations and invasions over the centuries. But what did the Anglo-Saxons look like? Well, they are often described as being tall and fair-haired, in line with various other depictions of Germanic peoples, although there is of course some variation here. But these traits of being tall and often having blonde hair aren't just stereotypes of Germanic peoples, but seem to have deep historical roots. Speaking of blonde hair, how did blonde hair and blue eyes first spread to Europe? To find out, please click here. Thanks for watching, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please also subscribe and hit the bell, and I'll see you next time.